We're going to start Senate Bill 143. I'm going to turn it to Alexis. When we were here last, we actually voted this bill out, and I represented at that time that we had exempted the munis and the co-ops, but it turns out the co-op was not incorporated into the amendment. So Alexis has, I think, an amendment in the packet that just adds the co-ops to the exemption level. So again, this is a bill that we did pass out last voting session.
That's right.
Unanimously. So I'll turn it back to you, but that's really all on 143.
So maybe another thing worth noting on Senate Bill 143, in addition to the municipal carve out and the rural co-op carve out, is that the Public Service Commission is tasked with determining a method for calculating the true up method. So the payout method for any excess generation that has been accrued under that indefinite method. Under the original bill, the excess generation was required to be forfeited. So that is additionally changed. And so we talked about the flipping prohibition. You can't switch without a company's approval, and the billing date is retained for the default net excess generation accrual. Under the bill, it was changed to August, and we've reverted back to maintain that April true up date for the default net excess generation.
Okay, so the only change though from the voting session is the muni, the co-op additional. And by the way, why don't you introduce the gentleman on your left, because folks may not even know who he is. So I do a quick introduction.
This is a wonderful DLSer, Steve Ross. He is responsible for most, if not all, of the wonderful public utilities related fiscal notes. And he has been a breadth of knowledge throughout wind energy and power and net excess generation even. So this is Steve. He'll be helpful today.
Okay, that said, any discussion about this one additional amendment to the bill that we voted out last week? Or motion favorable?
Favorable.
Augustine, second. All in favor of that additional amendment to the bill? All opposed? Okay, I guess we'll revote the bill. All in favor again of? Thank you. Second. All in favor? Okay, for the second time, Senate Bill 143 passes. Senate Bill 262. I think there are some issues that we wanted to work through on. Were you bringing them up or somebody else? MDE's raised some late issue here. So if you don't mind, I'd like to hold this for, we're going to be voting again tomorrow, but I want to hear why MDE has some issues or some questions and wanted us to address. Okay. Next up, Senate Bill 346, Senator King. Back to you, Alexis.
Oh, sorry.
346.
All right, so Senate Bill 346, Maryland Sign Language Interpreters Act. This bill establishes the State Board of Sign Language Interpreters and the Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing as a 7-member board. The board is required to license individuals for the provision of sign language services beginning January 1st, 2025, with certain exemptions and waiver of certifications. The bill authorizes the board to establish criteria for various specialist areas, including legal settings, medical settings, and behavioral health settings. The bill establishes the Sign Language Interpreters Fund to fund the board duties and to assist in the licensing of marginalized interpreters. It establishes a provisional license scheme for applicants who have passed the knowledge exams and the ethical exams, but have not passed written exams. And it establishes qualifying penalties and prohibitions against practicing without licensure or fraud and general board prohibitions for these labor-related boards. So there were no amendments that were proffered in the Senate for this committee, but it is worth mentioning that the House subcommittee did pass this bill with amendments. The House has not, but the subcommittee has. And so those amendments add 2 reporting requirements. The first requires the Office of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing to submit an annual report on activities of the board and complaints received by the board. Requires a report from the judiciary by January 1st, 2026, and for 2 subsequent years on interpreters, including the number of cases where an interpreter was required and the length of time it took or has taken to receive an interpreter, and the amount of cases where an emergency interpreter was required. There is a carve out under the bill where a license is not required under certain scenarios, And in the case of an emergency is one of those carve outs.
What's that? Yeah, those are, okay, yeah, those are House amendments. I would suggest this is how the bill's coming out of the House, but discussion, questions. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My question would be whether or not, do we know if the Senate sponsor has had an opportunity to see these? And if we discussed these with the Senate sponsor?
I think the Senate
The amendments, I'm
sponsor,
talking about the amendments.
sure. So the Senate sponsor has seen them and is aware. I'm not sure the extent to which the Senate sponsor loves them. Because this was definitely a House subcommittee iteration, but she, according to the sponsor, is open to considering it and would rather the bill move than be held up for that.
Here, why don't we do
addition.
this? Let me get some clarity. I think it was, maybe we got a little mixed message. I was under the impression that you're not in love, but okay enough for us to move. But with this sort of ambiguity here, let me clarify directly with her, on that. So I don't want to jam anything out without. What's that?
Before we go on, can I just say something?
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry. So we have a lot of people who are interested in our democracy, and I just wanted you to know what we're doing as we go through this debate. So we have a voting list, and I think there may be a couple extra copies, and we are looking at amendments and stuff. Those of us who are in our laptops may be looking at testimony and reading testimony. So I have Senator Augustine just mentioned the judiciary, and I was just reading their testimony from the Maryland Judicial Conference, which had concerns about access to ASL interpreters if we had licensing and stuff. So we're looking at that. We're looking at the fiscal impact, the cost to taxpayers of some of these proposals. We're looking at amendments. And so we're kind of considering all of these things as we're discussing and debating. So we're not necessarily updating our Facebook page or playing, solitaire or anything. We're really in these bills. And so since we've got folks who may not have engaged as much before, want you to know what it is that we're working on in this. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's Civics 101 lesson there for the day for the audience. Let's move on to Senate Bill 422.
Okay. Senate Bill 422, Natural Resources Black Bass Conservation Fund Establishment. This bill establishes a Black Bass Conservation Fund in the Department of Natural Resources consisting of voluntary monetary donations made by individuals at the time of purchasing a recreational fishing license to be used for black bass stocking, habitat enhancement, tournaments, and conservation research. There are no amendments, but in the written testimony, the department suggested that the fund should be added to the list of exempted funds under the state finance and procurement article so that interest earnings would accrue to the special fund and not revert to the general fund.
Okay, Senator Simonaire.
Yeah, cut to the chase. I'd like to hold this if I could. I'm working with the department, and just to give you a little background, a couple years ago, we put in a donation button on the Compass system for hunting and fishing licenses, and that's going to veterans. And so what this would do would piggyback on that and most assuredly take money from the veterans checkoff list. So I met with the department initially and asked them how much they're looking for. And it's in the ballpark of 150,000, and they'd like, if possible, go more, but they would require staffing, which eventually they would do that. The checkoff right now is bringing in about $10,000. And that's very needed for the veterans because we leverage that money through other programs to even get more benefits for them. So I'm trying to come up with a solution that will accomplish both things, but maybe not the exact mechanism. So if you just give me a little time to.
Okay, that's fine. Before we go on, let's go back to Senator King. I do have a message from Senator King. She's okay with the House amendments. And so why don't we go back to Senate Bill 346. Does anybody need them described again or not, the House amendments?
No, I think I remember. I'm willing
Yeah.
to move the amendments.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second from Senator Washington. All in favor of those amendments? Raise your hand. All opposed, those amendments carry. They've got the bill on the table as amended.
Move the bill as amended.
Senator Augustine, Senator Washington. Any discussion of the bill as amended? Okay, all in favor? raise your hand. All opposed, Senate Bill 346 carries. Next up, we're going to go to Senate Bill 483.
Senate Bill 483, Private Well Safety Act of 2023. This bill establishes the Private Well Safety Program and the Private Well Safety Fund administered by the Department of the Environment to manage and, subject to the availability of funding, address the contamination of private wells in the state. Purpose of the special fund is to award grants to eligible counties and covered households in ineligible counties for costs associated with water quality testing and remediation. Department may adopt regulations to implement the program. The bill also establishes related reporting and outreach requirements, as well as a requirement for contracts for the sale of real property. The department must also establish a private well water quality database utilizing an online portal to receive water quality tests as specified. There is an amendment in your bill packet from Senator Hester, amendment number 803-224/1. The amendment adds Senator Hester as a co-sponsor, adds the use of common water treatment technology such as whole house well water filtration systems to the methods included under the definition of remediation, requires the annual well report to include information on groundwater depletion and groundwater quality, requires the department to share information collected under the bill with the Maryland Department of Health and local health departments, and to encourage the Department of Health and local health departments to submit relevant information to the online portal. Finally requires the Department of the Environment to conduct a study on long-term funding options for the detailed monitoring and analysis of groundwater resources in the state and report its findings and recommendations to the General Assembly. In addition, I have heard that there were amendments being sort of considered in the House, but I don't know. I have not seen those yet. Okay.
Okay, we haven't seen these House amendments, so therefore we can't really take them into account here, I think, is the bottom line. Any discussion on those? Yeah, those were there's amendments, right? Yeah, yeah, okay. Hester amendments. Any questions about that on the Hester amendments? Sarah Hester, you want to add anything to what April said in terms of describing your amendment?
No, I just want to thank the bill sponsor. We worked on these together and they're joint amendments. So thank you so much.
Okay, would you like to move your amendment?
Second.
Okay, second. All in favor of the Hester amendment, raise your hand. All opposed. Bill on the table as amended. And again, we're talking about Senate Bill 483. Any motion? Absolutely. Senator Washington.
So MDE expressed a concern about that contaminant of.
Harry,
Oh,
Senator
sorry.
Washington, put the mic.
Contaminant of concern is referred to several times, but is not defined. And then they assert that there's no definition in the environmental article. Do we define it? And do you think that that's a problem?
It's not addressed in the amendments, but I don't have an answer for that.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Any further questions, discussion? Seeing none. Okay, so we have a bill on the table, favorable motion on the amended version of the bill. Again, any further discussion or questions? Seeing none. Any all in favor? Raise your hand. All opposed? That bill carries. Senate Bill 483. Next up, Senate Bill 508.
Senate Bill 508, Hemp Farming Program, Use of Hemp and Hemp Products and Consumable Products. This bill alters the definition of hemp and hemp product under the Hemp Farming Program and authorizes a person that produces hemp or a hemp product in accordance with the program to include the hemp or hemp product in consumable products for sale. Before offering for sale a consumable product that includes hemp, the person must ensure that the hemp is tested by an independent testing laboratory and meets specified requirements. I'm not going to go too much further into the description of the bill because there are amendments in your bill packet being offered by Senator Feldman. This is amendment number 123-126/1, and the reprint starts on page 37 of your voting packet. Senator Feldman's amendments strike the changes to the definition of hemp and language around dilution in the bill. Instead, the bill defines and authorizes the production of a consumable hemp product, establishes maximum THC concentrations for consumable hemp products consistent with the pending cannabis legislation, and requires THC levels in consumable hemp products to be tested and verified by state authorized cannabis or hemp testing laboratories. The one thing that I will say, I think we have sort of an amendment to the amendment suggested by MDA at the last minute that was just, if you are on page 39 of the voting packet, in that added language, consumable hemp product means, if you go down to subparagraph Roman numeral 2. Oh, sorry. Paragraph 2, consumable hemp product includes the acidic forms of cannabinoids extracted. They want to strike in a commercial kitchen because they say that in most cases, the farms are not necessarily doing it in commercial kitchens.
Okay, well, just want to give everybody a little context here. So this amendment is an attempt to align this with the cannabis legalization bill. And so a lot of this has to do with basically a loophole that was created in the 2018 Farm Bill. We've been dealing for the last 2 years about this loophole where products that are under a certain THC level in terms of dry weight, but when you process it, or you can actually synthetically change it, can then be produced to be intoxicating. And that loophole is a problem because right now that product that's legal under federal law, under the Farm Bill, becomes an intoxicating product, which is not regulated, tested, or anything in our state. So last session, Senator Augustine was on the committee. We had a product, it's called Delta 8. So that's a problem. So in the cannabis legalization bill that's up in the Finance Committee, our cannabis regulators have come up with a definition which they believe over and above becomes an intoxicating product with a lot of things that require testing, regulation, et cetera. So these numbers match what's up there is the numbers from our regulator. So over and above this 2.5 number, if you want to sell that, you're going to have to be licensed. You're going to be subject to the Cannabis Commission's testing, et cetera, et cetera. Below that, you're in non-intoxicating world in the hemp space. And what this says, this is a legal gray zone that we're trying to clarify, is to say, okay, if you're in this, you can sell, but you've got to get product tested, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we've got the Farm Bill, we have hemp and we have cannabis. This amendment is an attempt to, again, make this consistent with what we're doing in the cannabis legalization bill based on the feedback we've gotten from our regulator as to where that number is, where you're transitioning into intoxicating hemp subject to licensing by the Cannabis Commission. At the same time, below that, non-intoxicating properties, we're going to let you sell it, but you're going to have to go and get it tested, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at the language, you know, it's that same 0.5 milligrams to 2.5 derived from hemp. That's consumable. That's not intoxicating per our regulator, but you're still going to have to go out and get it tested, et cetera, et cetera. Safety standards we're going to apply. And so that's what this is a bit, you know, it came in a different form. This is a simplified version of distinguishing between intoxicating, and non-intoxicating hemp. I hope I'm being clear because this is a complicated area because of this loophole that's existed since 2018. And question, Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I get it. So say once again, so if the hemp is stronger than the 0.5 considered intoxicating.
Well, 0.25, it says it's between 0.5 or, you know,
2.5.
per serving. Yeah, it's per serving or per package. You see
Right.
that.
So if
over
it's
and above,
greater,
then you're in intoxicating hemp world. And under the other bill, you're going to be subject, in order to do that, you're going to need a license from what's now the Cannabis Commission, which is going to be the Alcohol, Tobacco, Cannabis Commission. You're into it. This is an intoxicating product.
So if a current hemp grower definitely wants to produce a crop that's stronger than the 2.5, they would have to compete for the licenses like other cannabis folks?
You're into the cannabis intoxicating hemp world. That bill, of course, hasn't passed yet, but this language is in that bill. It's up in the Finance Committee, correct?
So this would be covered in that bill.
Right. There's provisions dealing with intoxicating product here that's out there in the market over and above that.
So I think
0.5 or 2.5.
I guess my fundamental question is, the bill that we're expecting to see fundamentally has X number of licenses for growers and dispensaries and X, Y, and Z. Will this compete with that, or will this be additive to?
So that bill, is an 88-page bill that deals with existing medical cannabis licensees being able to convert and transition into the legal adult use market. On top of that, then there's a whole regime starting in January, because again, we passed laws we had a referendum in November, so this is all becoming legal. A licensing regime for social equity applicants that's going to extend into 2024. And that is largely for cannabis products, but also in that bill, if you're in the hemp world and you're trying to sell product over these numbers, then yes, you're going to have to be licensed under the Cannabis Commission if you want to sell product that's defined as hemp under the federal farm bill, if you want to actually sell that in the adult use cannabis market. That in effect then is tantamount to no different than cannabis at that point when you're over and above that amount. So
But the commonality is THC in both products.
exactly. So these
Okay.
THC numbers are really the bottom line. Over and above that, our regulators saying that's intoxicating. Below that is deemed non-intoxicating. And so the bill that came in was dealt with dry weight, not THC levels in the end product. See, the difference here is this is talking about the end product that can go to consumers. The bill as came in dealt with dry weight, which is in the language from the farm bill at the federal level. So yes, I think that's kind of the demarcation point. We want to regulate. Right now, this is gray zone. This is unregulated product. Yes.
I know it's been changed now, so it's different than what the Department of Health was talking about before.
Health has taken a fairly hardline stance that CBD is not authorized to be included in consumable products under federal law ever. So that's
Yeah, but
their-
we already know that
and
we've
that's
already,
right.
we've already made our call on that, right? I mean, I'm saying as a state, we've made our call on that. And so you think that's really sort of at the heart of what they're talking about? And if so, we've already kind of made our policy decision on that.
Can I just weigh in? Okay. Our medical cannabis program has been in existence in 2004 in blatant violation of federal law.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, the idea of the federal law boogeyman, I mean, that's been 10 years and we're moving forward with an adult in violation of federal law. So
Right.
I appreciate the concern about what federal law says, but at this point, 10 years out or 8 years out, I appreciate it, but I don't know that that's a reason to not want to regulate an intoxicating product that's out there in the market, untested, unregulated, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be the trade-off here. Any other questions on this amendment or the underlying bill? Again, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
That's it. Aside from the MDA's suggestion to strike the reference to commercial kitchens.
In Farm Bureau's testimony, they had a couple amendment ideas. One of them was to expand industrial hemp to allow for hemp derived fiber, grain, or topical products. Was any of that like brought into consideration, or is that just opposed to that? Or
I'll let April weigh in. This bill's really dealing with this consumable product out in the market. The industrial hemp issue, to me, I don't think there's really I don't know that we need like a new law to deal with industrial hemp. I mean, I don't, commercial hemp. This is the focus of this bill is about this product that's being consumed, not non-consumable industrial hemp. But April, you want to weigh in?
I will say, so I'm just trying to reread their testimony. There was concern that the original bill was going to kind of blow up the existing hemp program and the existing sort of product regulation under that, because of the way the definition of hemp and hemp product was in the original bill. Senator Feldman's amendments basically would change nothing about the existing hemp program regulation for hemp plants and hemp products. The only thing it would change is sort of creating this pathway to legally produce consumable hemp products consistent with the regulatory framework that's being established in the cannabis bill, but have these non-intoxicating consumable hemp products under the purview of the Department of Agriculture.
Okay, any additional questions?
I'll move the amendments.
Okay, Senator Augustine moves the amendments. There's a second. Senator Brooks, all in favor of the amendments? Raise your hand. All opposed? Got the bill on the table as amended.
Can I just clarify?
Yeah,
We also,
sure.
that is including the striking of the commercial kitchen.
Yeah,
language?
yes. Yeah, we'll take the,
Yeah, I'll move the bill as amended.
okay, Senator Augustine has a motion. Is there a second? Senator Brooks, any discussion on the bill as amended? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, Senate Bill 508 as amended, raise your hand. All opposed, bill carries. Next up, we're going to go to Senate Bill 551, the Senate President's bill. Stacy?
Senate Bill 551, Education Service Year Option Establishment, Serve Act of 2023. This administration bill establishes the Service Year Option Program and related fund within the Department of Service and Civic Innovation to provide year-long service placements to recent high school graduates and other individuals. Program participants must work 30 hours a week, partner with an on-site mentor, and be paid $15 per hour by the participating employer. The department may provide stipends of up to $3,000 to participants who complete a placement and must evaluate the program as specified and adopt regulations to implement the program. There are two amendments to be offered. The first one starts on page 43 of your voting packet, and this is a reprint because the amendments were so extensive. There's also a little chart that we put together to walk through these amendments since the bill is extensively amended. As you recall from the hearing, the governor had issued an executive order, and that executive order created the Department of Service and Civic Innovation and did a couple other things. That executive order, because the legislature did not decline through a resolution, it became effective this past Saturday. So this bill touches on the codification of various provisions from that executive order. And so that's what I'm going to walk you through here. So the first talks about the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. So the executive order established it in Title IX, Subtitle 28. For drafting reasons, putting a new principal department in a tiny little subtitle made for difficult drafting later on. So this was repealed and replaced by putting it in its own title, Title 21 of the state government article, and it beefed up some of those provisions. And you can find those starting on page 45. Section 1 is where it's repealed, and then other parts of the bill redraft those. With regard to the Maryland Core program, the executive order transfers it from section 24, title 24, subtitle 11 of the education article into the state government article. And this amendment now transfers that program to subtitle 2 of the new title for the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. The Governor's Office of Service and Volunteerism was renumbered in the executive order to fall under their provision for the department. This is again renumbered to be put in this new title. The executive order extends in-state tuition to individuals who complete the program. This amendment updates the cross references for that. The service year option is created by Senate Bill 551, and that is established in Title 24, Subtitle 11A of the Education article. Essentially, you'll look at it and you'll see that it's stricken from the bill, but what this amendment does is it folds in those provisions into the existing Maryland Core program as it existed, and it is listed as the Young Adult Service Year Option Pathway. The amendments also make lots of revisions to the Maryland Core program to show there's now two pathways. There's the governor's program, the Young Adult Service Year Option Pathway, and then there is the Maryland Service Year Option Pathway, and that is provisions related to the existing Maryland Core program. The Maryland Core program was governed by an executive director and board of directors. It is now administered by the department, and the board of directors is an advisory board, and there's a repeal of the executive director provisions. You'll see those on page 50 and 52 of the reprint. The advisory board had a joint appointment of the chair and 2 gubernatorial appointments. There were no term limits or minimum meeting requirements. Those were all changes made. You can see those on page 51 and 52. There's now a chair appointed by the governor, 4 gubernatorial appointments. There's a 2-term limit, at least 3 meetings a year, and they've added some duties of this advisory board. And it provides for a termination of the initial terms of the advisory board members. As I stated, there's establishment of the 2 pathways, and you can start seeing the first pathway on page, that's on the language establishing those 2 pathways is on page 50. The Maryland Core program had some focus areas for service opportunities. The amendment expands some of those focus areas to include public and community health sectors and clean and renewable energy. That language is on page 53. The initial bill came in requiring participants to receive $15 per hour and a $3,000 program completion award. They now, the 2 pathways have very similar stipends and completion awards, and it's actually been bumped up. So the language requires a minimum wage or $15 per hour, whichever is greater. And the program completion award has been increased to $6,000 as it was in the previous Maryland Core program, which can be paid as a cash stipend or deposited in a Maryland 529 plan. That's on page 54. Which can be used, again, remember, it can be vested or it doesn't have to be the tuition benefit plan. Just one of the, so. The Young Adult Service Year Pathway was the standalone program from Senate Bill 551. And as I said, that's been merged in here, and that the particulars to this pathway are on pages 55 through 59. The main distinction between these 2 pathways is going to be the cohort in which is being served. The young adult pathway is more focused on recent high school graduates and individuals with similar educational levels. Those provisions on page 55 discuss having graduated high school within 3 years or within participants who apply should have graduated from a high school or received a diploma through examination. But it also adds a Maryland High School Certificate of Program Completion per the disabilities advocates that came from the committee in front of this committee. Page 56 and 57 has some core participant requirements. There's some modification to those requirements. The initial bill also had a program fund. This bill and this amendment has program funds for both pathways. So there's a young adult pathway fund, and then there's a Maryland Service Year Pathway Fund. The young adult pathway fund is on page 58. Also on 58 is the start of the Maryland Service Year Option Pathway. It discusses some of the eligibility requirements, which are essentially anyone who wants to do service in the state of Maryland. It adds some core participant requirements on page 59. It modifies to make to rename this fund the Maryland Service Year Pathway Fund. That's on page 59 and 61. Last year, this General Assembly voted for a mandatory appropriation for the Maryland Corps program that is retained only for the Maryland Service Year Pathway, and that's on page 61. Further along in the bill, there's a requirement that the department explore the possibility of obtaining credit for prior learning for experience towards trades or vocational certifications, and it requires the department to consult with specified entities exploring academic credit or credit for prior learning. You can find those provisions on page 62 and 63. Further, both funds are authorized to create other topic-specific cores, also on page 63. And finally, the original bill came in with requiring an independent program evaluation and a report in 2028, as long as a dashboard to be published after that report. On page 63, you can find some modifications to clarify exactly what that evaluation is evaluating. There is one additional amendment that I didn't get a chance to draft because the amendments took a long time. There'll be information in the annual reports for both funds that discusses, for example, the number and disaggregated demographic breakdown of participants and other such similar information. I can answer any questions if people have them.
Okay, any questions? Again, I said Senate President, I meant the governor's bill. Any questions on the amendment, Senator Gallion?
So on page 61 of the reprint, I'm looking down kind of in the bottom part. It says the governor shall include in the annual budget bill pathway fund. So it gets up starting in FY 27. It's 20 million a year every. Am I reading that right? So
Yes.
I thought we were getting away from the shall and those funding items.
So this is existing language, and this was added last year by the General Assembly to the existing Maryland Corps program.
Was that 20? It was 20 million started.
Correct.
Okay, so that was last year.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, additional questions for Stacy on the amendments?
Quick-
Senator Watson?
Yeah, quick question, and just pardon my ignorance on this. The amendment related to the Maryland 529 plan, not talking about the efficacy of the plan, but so when a individual finishes this year of service, they're going to be awarded $3,000, and they have the option of dropping it into a 529 plan. And right now, the 529 plan is I'm sorry, 6,000. The 529 plan is an investment account that historically you put the money in over long periods of time to be able to go off to college. Is there really value in somebody who's already graduated from school dropping 3,000 in the 529 plan? Are they going to let it sit there and try to accrue some interest for 3, 4, 5 years and then go to college?
Yeah, Senator Augustine might want to weigh in on this conversation for sure.
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I think we always are going to want to encourage people to continue their education, right? And so the 529, I think, offers an opportunity for that. And it's also my understanding that there's also some tax benefits associated with it as well, so that you don't, that they were able to maintain the full amount by virtue of putting it in the 529 to go towards their future education instead of being hit with a tax bill like $1,200 or something like that on the money. So it just helps to extend the money more fully for the youngster.
You're assuming they already have
No. I mean, I think is you're getting one, right? I mean, if the 529 will allow for using that as the vehicle, would allow for it to be kept tax-free for that use. Like, let's say they're not ready to use it, or you know what I'm saying?
I should also note that this was existing language for the Maryland Core Program, and the cash stipend is the change made through these amendments.
I guess another argument you could make is it just getting, we had this whole financial literacy issue. Maybe it just gets folks, thinking about investing, even if it's a modest amount of money. I mean, there could be, some value just thinking about saving for your future. Senator Washington.
Thank you, Senator Watson. I just want to draw your attention to the words, if I draw your attention to the words, Senator Watson, to something that you asked a question about, Senator Watson, about the use of the 6,000, that it's a may, right? So the student would choose to either get the cash or they could do the 529, but also this is minimum standards, minimum suggestions. There certainly could be others. So it's not saying that it has to be that. They could just put it in a savings account, et cetera. But the tax implications and also the potential implications of it for low income people, we haven't cleared it yet, but if somebody's getting, we want to make sure if they're getting the $6,000 that it all of a sudden doesn't make them ineligible for other benefits that they might be eligible for based on income. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion, questions? Senator Brooks.
On the 529, isn't there a max contribution, annual contribution of about $2,500 in the 529 plan?
I don't think so. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I think if my memory is correct, there's a maximum contribution, annual contribution of a 2,500 per individual, so. Okay,
Aware of that.
okay.
I'm assuming that the governor putting the bill together must probably, I assume you have a provision.
So
dealing-
that language was existing Maryland Core language, and the cash stipend was the change that was added through these amendments. So the existing was a $6,000 to be deposited in these accounts. So
Okay.
All right.
Any other questions for Stacy or discussion points on the amendments? Or just on the amendments? Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stacy, I'm on page 54 of the reprint. Number 5, reasonable workplace accommodations for core participants with disabilities. I wonder whether there's anything, and I read it as quickly and carefully as I could. Was there anything for people for whom English is not their primary language?
no.
So I wonder whether, and this is new, it just occurred to me, so reasonable accommodations for non-native English speakers or something. It seems to me that somebody who is somewhat new to this country, speaks a language other than English at home or at school or at work or whatever, can still work effectively with a nonprofit, in a community, in a faith organization, and make a big difference in a community, in an immigrant community or another kind of diverse, linguistically diverse community. And I wonder if that's something that is, if that's something that we should consider. So
Okay, well,
don't know if that's.
again, we're
if that's-
discussion point here. Open it up.
So this section is about regulations that the department must shall adopt regarding the program. So that would be a policy decision of this committee if you wished to add that.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on suggestion from Senator Kagan? Okay, I'm not seeing a lot of conversation.
No love
Okay,
for non-native English speakers?
I'm not seeing, well, what's that?
No,
I mean, you want to offer that kind of language? Where would it fit exactly?
I would put it right after. On page 54, reasonable workplace accommodations for core participants with disabilities, which I think is appropriate. Reasonable workplace accommodations for core participants who are non-native English speakers, or whatever the right language would be. Anyway, what we can,
Okay.
so it wouldn't mandate it for every placement or every core member. But there are going to be, I think we do want to welcome and lower a barrier to people, for people who aren't conversant in English, but can still make a difference in their communities, in their immigrant communities, and work speaking Spanish in a Spanish language community with a nonprofit, making a difference there. No set asides, no, just reasonable accommodations if there are applicants.
Okay, if we take this conceptual amendment, do you have enough, Stacy, that it could be reduced to verbiage? Okay, why don't you want to just move in a formal way your conceptual amendment and
Okay.
then we can discuss it.
In an informal way with language TBD, that concept, that which I have explained.
Okay, is there a second? Thank you, Senator Washington. Any discussion on what you just described? Any conversation, discussion, pushback? Do we need a roll call or do we need? Yeah, absolutely, Senator
I'm
Augustine.
like trying to take it in, but I'm trying to take it in. So in front of it, it's got the reasonable workplace accommodations
Mhm.
for participants with disabilities.
Mhm.
And I understand that. That's like, you got a place of work that the person has or something that they're participating in, and we want to make sure that there's an accommodation at that place for the person with disabilities. So and is that what your, because those seem like that's a little, is that different than maybe what you were contemplating when we think about what this was going on in this section?
Thank you, Senator. It may be that that's not the right place, because I wouldn't expect a workplace with no non-native speakers
Right,
to accommodate someone who doesn't speak English. That
Right.
would be a bridge too far.
right.
But I think maybe in the selection of our fellows, of our students, of our, what are we calling them, participants, that we would want to make sure that no one would be disqualified because of a lack of English skills.
Mhm.
So Stacy, maybe my suggestion of that location is completely incorrect based on Senator Augustine's comments, which I think.
It depends on your intent. For example, the way I understood your intent was that they would have to modify the workplace to, if a participant happened to be a non-native English speaker, they would have to do that. I think Senator Augustine was getting to the idea that it's not necessarily equivalent to a person who has a disability. And that you're saying that in selection of participants for the program, what about non-native English speakers do you want to accommodate?
That's more, yeah, so I think my placement, my suggested placement, I think you and Senator Augustine are right. I think that location is not right, but it was the disabilities accommodations. So I think it doesn't belong there, but it would be in the selection of participants.
So are you saying you don't want to limit it by that? Are you saying that?
Correct. Yeah,
Senator Washington.
I think I found
Tell me.
a location. So it would be on page 53. It would be under the department shall administer and manage the program. And then it talks about expanding the services and a cohort. And then number 2, where it talks about equitable access, would non-native, would it fit there?
So sub 2 under 21-204.
Yeah.
B sub 2, which currently says ensuring all individuals have equitable access to participate in the program regardless of gender, race, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, disability, geography, or protected veteran status.
That's fine. You're just saying I don't discriminate based on the fact that somebody doesn't speak the language.
Yeah.
I mean, that's different than an eligibility provision, which is different
I
than
think
an
that's- I
accommodation.
think that's what I want to.
If that's what you're trying to get at, certainly. You want to make sure your intent is clear so we can
Thank you. Senator
amend in the
Washington.
correct
That's-
location.
That's the right place for
Okay,
it.
is everybody clear on Senator Kagan's intent? on
And now we
this?
have the right place.
And we've selected an appropriate section of the bill. Okay, any further discussion, questions about this particular conceptual amendment? Seeing none. Okay, all in favor of what we just described, raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, amendment carries. Any further questions, discussions on the governor's amendments plus. Anybody want to move the amendments? Senator Augustine moves the amendments, Senator Washington's second. Any discussion, further discussion on any of the amendments? Any further questions on any of the amendments? Okay, all in favor of all the amendments in front of us, raise your hand. All opposed? The amendments carry. Got the bill on the table as amended, the governor's bill, Senate Bill 551. We have a motion from Senator Washington. Is there a second from Senator Augustine? Discussion. Okay, why don't we do a roll call on this one? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Senator Gallion.
I'll do this, I guess, it kind of explaining my vote. But I like a lot of the ideas with this, but I see, talked about where we're heading economically with these different challenges we're going to have. And I just have concerns over really adding another government agent department here. So I'm going to be voting no on it. Thank you.
Okay, any other further comments? Okay, we'll take a roll call on this one. Start with the vice chair.
Senator Kagan.
Aye.
Senator Kagan, yes. Senator Augustine.
Yes.
Senator Augustine, yes. Senator Gallion. Senator Gallion, no. Senator Watson. Senator Watson, yes. Senator Lewis Young.
Yes.
Senator Lewis Young, yes. Senator Brooks.
Yes.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Carozza. Senator Carozza, no. Senator Hester.
Yes.
Senator Hester, yes. Senator Washington.
Yes.
Senator Washington, yes. Senator Simonaire.
Yes.
Senator Simonaire, yes. And Senator Feldman.
Yes.
Senator.
Yes,
Feldman,
bill
yes.
carries.
Two.
Senate Bill 551 carries. Next up, Lexus, we're on Senate Bill 663.
Senate Bill 663, investor-owned electric companies, clean energy homes, pilot programs, establishment, Maryland Resilient and Clean Energy Homes Act. This bill requires each of the investor-owned electric companies in the state to develop a 3-year pilot program by January 1st, 2024 for beneficial electrification or attempting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The program must include an electrification make-ready program consisting of grants and rebates, a rebate program for on-site clean energy generators and clean energy systems, an incentive program for multifamily housing facilities, a load management and electric grid support services program. The bill establishes caps on the rebates to be applied for grant and rebate programs. The pilot program obligations do not apply to electric cooperatives or municipally owned utilities. The program costs that are incurred by a utility are limited to 1% of the electric company's revenue and is capped at $15 million, but that is also subject to exemption. The pilot program lasts until January 1st, 2027. There are sponsor amendments which delay the development and implementation of the pilot program for each electric company by 1 year. The amendments also authorize, but they do not require the use of a meter collar adapter in the program. It adds interlocking devices if meter collar adapters are used, requires electric companies to test meter collars and to approve them for use within a certain period, requires the PSC to consider rates, cost effectiveness, and environmental impacts in accepting or approving an application filed by an investor-owned utility. It delays the review on the cap on utility spending, as mentioned above, from within 30 days for filing for an exemption to exceed the cap to within 60 days from filing the petition to exceed the cap. Removes incentives for on-site clean energy generators, requires a customer in the pilot program to enroll in a utilities program to distribute the load of energy that they use.
Okay, discussion about those amendments. Just to clarify, this issue of cost effectiveness criteria, try to incorporate some of the PSC and Office of People's Counsel concerns, and then the amendments. So I think with the amendments, I think a lot of the concerns or issues that were raised at the hearing have been addressed. But it's a pilot program. Obviously, the goal here is we talked a lot about electrifying our homes. It's a pilot to try to do things on the front end so we can save a lot of money down the road in terms of energy costs. So this, I think it's an interesting model, but open for some discussion here. Okay, is there a motion on the amendments?
So moved.
Okay, favorable second, all in favor of these amendments? Okay, all opposed, amendments carry. bill as amended, Senate Bill 663. Your motion?
So moved.
Okay, Senator Kagan, Senator Lewis Young. Any discussion on the bill as amended? Yes, Senator Simon.
If I'm recalling, is this the one where you have the homes and then also the multi-homes? Or is that a different bill?
The electric vehicle charging station bill is what I think
Okay,
you're
I'm on-
referring to.
there's too
Completely
many- too
different
many
bill.
bills.
Complete, that had to do with the builders and new different bill. Okay, any further conversation about the bill as amended, Senate Bill 663? Okay, all in favor, 663, raise your hand. All opposed? 663 carries. Next up, we're to the sunset extension for the Board of Architects. Senator Kagan, you held this last time, so I'll turn it to you regard to your issues or questions you had when we took it up last voting session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have spent more time on this bill than you can imagine. I've spoken to a lot of people. We had an amendment drafted. It wasn't quite the amendment that we were expecting. We wanted to model it on the real estate appraisers that the body approved unanimously this morning in third reader. Ultimately, I'm just going to suggest that we move the bill rather than a 10-year sunset because it does expire this year. So we do need to take action. I don't think we want the architects board to sunset. So I'm going to suggest 5 years. They can continue to work to improve and we'll have a little bit of time to check in, but they won't be quite worried about us breathing down their neck tomorrow. So that's my suggestion, 5 years.
Okay, any discussion on moving it from 10 down to 5?
With no study, no report, no restrictions.
Okay, any pushback concerns with that? Okay, so is that a formal motion to move it from 10 to 5?
That is a formal motion, no. Formal motion from 10 years to 5 years, but with no reports, no studies, no consultants and stuff as others have done.
Okay, is there a
5 years.
second on the Kagan amendment? Okay, Senator Hester's second. Any discussion again on the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of that amendment, raise your hand. All opposed, that amendment carries. We've got on the table 713 as amended. Any discussion?
Favorable.
Okay, we've got a favorable. We already had a favorable second. All in favor of the bill as amended, 713. 713 carries. Next up, 741, Senator Jackson. And we're going to go to April.
Senate Bill 741, Public Safety Refrigerants Limitations on Use. This bill establishes that notwithstanding any other law, regulation, or requirement in the state, the use of a refrigerant may not be prohibited or otherwise limited if one, the refrigerant is designated as acceptable for use in accordance with 42 USC 7671, a provision of the Federal Clean Air Act, which governs stratospheric ozone protection, and any appliance containing the refrigerant designated for acceptable use is labeled, installed, serviced, repaired, used, and disposed of in accordance with the safety standards and use conditions under that provision of federal law. There are amendments in your packet. The amendments are on page 84. The reprint begins on page 85. It's amendment number 443027/1 by Senator Jackson. It makes some technical and clarifying changes. And specifies that an appliance is only required to be installed and used in accordance with federal safety standards and use conditions. And most importantly, the amendment specified that the bill does not prohibit the Department of the Environment from adopting regulations prohibiting the use of refrigerant. It's really targeted at particularly building codes that might have list of authorized refrigerants that leave off some of the newer ones approved under federal law.
Okay, any questions on the amendments as described by April? Okay, any motion to move the amendments? Any favorable? We've got Senator Lewis Young. Is there a second? Senator Watson. Okay, all in favor of the amendments, raise your hand. All opposed, amendments carry. We've got the bill 741 on the table. Is there a motion? Okay, Senator Brooks favorable, second, Senator Watson. All in favor, Senate Bill 741 as amended, raise your hand. All opposed, bill carries. Before we go to the offshore wind, there are 2 bills on the back. Why don't we leave the offshore wind bill for last so we can just devote whatever time we need. So we've got April, Senate Bill 823, and then we have, after that, Senate Bill 830. Let's deal with those first, and then we'll go back.
Right.
Final bill will be optional one.
Senate Bill 823, Natural Resources Annual State Park Pass Discounts for Law Enforcement Officers and First Responders. This bill requires the Department of Natural Resources to provide a discount of at least $40 on annual state park passes for all first responders and law enforcement officers who are Maryland residents. I have not received any amendments, but Senator Kagan has requested to be added as a co-sponsor on this bill.
Okay, we've got the sponsor amendment from Senator Kagan. Any problem? Anybody have a problem with adding Senator Kagan as a co-sponsor? Okay, well, all in favor, all opposed, the co-sponsor amendment carries. We got the bill as amended before us. Any discussion on Senate Bill 823 from Senator Carrozza? Senator Carrozza.
To bring to my colleagues' attention that there was, and during the testimony, a proposal to add the park rangers, since apparently they are in code as first responders. I checked with DNR. They confirmed that that was the case. So I just wanted to make sure that it was not part of my original proposal because of my focus on police, fire, EMS, first responders, but then that was brought to my attention. So I put that out there for the committee to decide if they want to include the park rangers.
Only question, I guess, is fiscal. Does it have any fiscal note implication by adding park ranger? I don't know. What's that? I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. Senator Gallion, I'm just thinking.
I'm just trying to figure this out here. So it's for park rangers so they can go into the parks and not a charge. So can't they just like show a badge, or is it concern that they want to be able to go in with their families? What I'm trying to just figure that one out.
Why don't you direct that to the sponsor of the bill? I can't answer that one.
I'm trying to, first of all, look at the testimony on behalf of the park rangers, and also I was trying to look at my response from DNR. So
What we could do is we could go to Senator Hester's bill and then come back to this bill. So if you need some more time to do whatever research you want.
just to answer the questions.
Okay, well, let's go to, let's put that to the end of the calendar, which is going to be right after the Senator Hester bill. So let's go to Senate Bill 830, April, and why don't you describe Senate Bill 830, and we'll come back to Senate Bill 823.
Right, Senate Bill 830, Environmental Health Specialist and On-Site Sewage Disposal Systems Reform, Environmental Health Systems Support Act of 2023. This bill establishes various provisions relating to environmental health specialist and on-site sewage disposal or septic systems. There are amendments in your bill packet, amendment number 443725/1, which appears on page 87 of the voting packet. Reprint starts on 89. The amendments strike most of the bill, leaving only the following study requirements. First, there's a study from the Department of the Environment and the Department of Health in conjunction with the Board of Environmental Health Specialists on staffing needs for environmental health specialists in local health departments. Second, there is a study by the Department of the Environment in consultation with the Department of Legislative Services and the University of Maryland Agriculture and Food Systems Extension Program, studying the implications of the delegation of the Department of the Environment's authority related to well and septic system permitting to the Department of Health. The amendment also extends the bill's sunset date to June 30th, 2025.
Okay, Senator Hester.
Chair. So as introduced, this bill was trying to do three things. First of all, address the staffing shortages and pay scale issues that we have. Second, improve consistency, because oftentimes Department of Health and the Department of the Environment are not exactly clear at the local level who's doing what with regards to septic systems. And the third thing was this IT system. In conversations with Do It and with MDE, they are going through the major IT development project process. It's going to take some time, but given the time and the fiscal constraints, I figured that the best thing to do would be get these studies done such that we get really good information and come back here next year with a bill that everybody agrees on.
Okay, do you want to move the Hester amendments, Senator Hester?
Move the Hester amendments and then move the bill.
That's the only amendment. Okay, we have motion and a second. Any discussion of the Hester amendments? Yes, Senator Carozza.
Sorry, I'm trying to bring myself up to speed. I saw there was some Mako testimony about supporting with amendments. Is that what your amendment addresses or?
No. So Mako loved the bill, but thought that we should bump up everybody's salary, which was, and they thought we needed like $5 million more. We can pay these people more. And so I think that we will get there eventually. We'll figure out what we need to do to keep these people, to retain these people at the local level. I think they would still support the study. They just want us to move faster, but sometimes you gotta, walk before you can run.
Okay, any further? We have a motion on the amendments and a favorable motion and a second. Any further discussion on the Hester amendments? Okay, all in favor of those amendments, raise your hand. All opposed? Bill is on the table in front of us. Is there a motion favorable from Senator Hester? Is there a second from Senator Kagan? All in favor of Senate Bill 830 as amended? Raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, Senate Bill 830 carries. Back to Senate Bill 823. Senator Carozza, on our park rangers issue, did you find any information?
I asked the question because I've been doing this bill in consultation with the Department of Natural Resources. And the concern I was hearing from others about this amendment is if you open it up for current state employees, such as park rangers, that you might be opening up the floodgates and that then you get into questions of fiscal impact. I don't have a response on what other DNR staff may already be receiving discounts. So I asked for that information. I don't have it. My concern is if, park rangers being classified as first responders, then that would include them in the definition of covering the other first responders. But do we want to differentiate between those who are actually current state employees, which may open up other requests down the road that then may have a fiscal impact, which to me, we know what the primary purpose here was focusing on first responders. So, and I know that Vice Chair works a lot with the first responders across the board. So it's one that, I wanted to bring it to the table because it was involved. We did hear testimony and I don't have all the answers to know whether or not, I don't want anything that would so negatively impact the fiscal note that it then opens it up so we can't provide this discount for the intended purpose.
Well, I'm still hung up on Senator Gallion's point about park rangers getting discounts to go into parks. I would think I'm a little baffled by that one, Senator Gallion.
I don't know, just an idea or suggestion, why don't we just move it without the amendment? And if you dig in the next day or so and say we need something, then possibly offer it on the floor. But for our purposes now to keep it rolling, maybe let's do it without.
I would move the bill without that amendment at this point, given that we don't have all the information on the fiscal impact.
So do we have a motion? Only amendment we have is the sponsor amendment from Senator Kagan, but is there a motion? Yes, question.
Thought I was on this bill. Can I jump?
Yes, anybody else want to go on this bill as a sponsor beyond Senator Kagan? Okay. Okay, here, I'll go on there too. Okay, we'll all go on there. First responders, we love our first responders.
Is
Okay.
anybody not?
Yeah, who doesn't, who does not want to be on this bill? Okay, looks like it's, everybody wants to go on there.
Stacy.
I just want to say one thing.
Okay, Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would rather say this here than on the floor. So I agree and disagree with Senator Gallion. I don't want us to have this amendment on the floor because I don't want us to be either forced to include park rangers or vote against them on the floor. I think what was said earlier about they're already in the parks, they can go to the parks. This is honoring our first responders. And I love that Senator Carrozza has been working on this bill. And I've already been talking about it to our 911 specialists who are our first responders. I think this is a thank you present to those who put their mental or physical health on the line. And this is a very modest little thank you note to let them into parks. Park rangers, I'm not saying that they are safe 100% of the time, but they get to be outdoors, they get to hike, they get to like play with cute kids and puppies. And I don't know, I don't think that they're the same as police, fire, paramedics, our first responders, and those who really endanger their lives through their work every day. And so I prefer that this not come to the floor. And I love the bill as it is. And I commend Senator Carrozza for bringing this bill, but I actually don't agree with the idea of adding our park rangers,
Okay,
either now or on the floor.
Senator Washington.
Madam Vice Chair, I believe, but park rangers are our first responders, and I don't know that we'd be getting into this first responders. I mean, if there's a fire in a park or a child is lost or, there's a flood. I mean, these park rangers are trained. I mean, I don't know if they belong to the same association that you're current, but just because of where they work, they still respond to all of those. They get that training. So I just think that if they are first responders, then they're already, but I'm happy with the bill as it is. But I just, wanted to say that I don't know that, I guess I've already said it. I don't know that they're any less brave or responsive. They're not just tour guides,
Okay, why don't we bring this back and forth to some closure? You want to respond to that and then let's vote
Just
the
one
bill.
quick thing. If there was a fire, then it would be a firefighter. If there was a lost child, there would be a police officer probably involved, and the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, police officers are already included. So it's not, I'm not just referencing tour guides, and I'm not trying to minimize in any way, but just trying to keep it. And first responders is what we call the courageous women and men under the headset, because if they can't do their jobs, then we don't get the police, fire, and paramedics that are dispatched to our places of emergency. So everyone else is the first responders, but the people getting the call, they're called the first responders. That's why I use that term.
Responders.
First responders.
Okay.
First
Okay.
responders.
Clears
Back
that
to
up.
the bill. We have a bill on the table in front of us with the group sponsor amendment. And we had a motion, we had a second, I believe. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of this piece of legislation, raise your hand. And we're talking about Senate Bill 823. All opposed, 823 with everybody on as a sponsor carries, which brings us to our final bill of the day. Senator Hester, Senate Bill 781, offshore wind. And we're going to go to you, Alexis.
Right. Senate Bill 781, Offshore Wind Energy State Goals and Procurement, Promoting Offshore Wind Energy Resources Act, or the Power Act. So you have a separate packet before you. In that packet, there are amendments labeled H1, and then if you filter through the packet, there are amendments that begin at A1. And they go from H1 through H24, A1 through likely A24 as well. And there's a primer in there and sort of describes the bill on the latter parts of the packet. Beside the packet, there should be an additional amendment sponsored by Senator Carrozza and a helpful chart. We walked through this on Friday, but we can take a few moments and go through the chart, kind of help conceptualize some of the key issues and where we are. Have some corresponding page numbers in case that's helpful. So we start with our chart on page 1. Sure, Senator.
I know we were doing a lot of back and forth. I see the one amendment,
Mhm.
but that was in addition to what I
Fair
already,
enough.
is that,
In addition to Senator Hester's.
no, in
Okay.
addition to the three I sent you earlier. So this is one, but I had sent,
Okay, I may have to double check. I just am in receipt of that one, carving out Ocean City. Can we speak to the additional intent if I may have overlooked those?
okay,
There was something in addition to the Ocean City one?
yes.
Okay,
you were-
okay,
Yeah,
I'll take a look.
okay.
So, while I sort of multitask a bit here.
Does
we
everybody,
start-
just to be clear before, does everybody have this chart document? It reads transmission study and procurement. And then it's got the bill in the left column, Esther amendments in the middle column, Augustine amendments in the right. Does everybody have that? Okay. Try to, if you don't, raise your hand, we'll help you find it. Yeah. Here, I think. Simon Air needs one too. Yeah, let's make, before we start, I think this was helpful. Okay. Who still doesn't have the document? Just we, okay, here, take this one. Or, okay. Yeah,
We'd have to check with,
yeah, we're just gonna take a quick pause so we can get some additional copies to make sure everybody has this before we start the discussion.
Put one on everyone's desk. Who doesn't have one? How many more do we need?
Raise your hand if you don't have one so we can know how many we need.
You don't have one? Okay, well, you have my copy, Senator Simon Air. Just one? You have an extra two? Okay, well, if it's just one, I can run this over. Keep that one.
These were the ones I sent. Okay. And all of the students do the input out. Just the first one. But then
We get Lemoria back in here. What- if we-
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay,
once we get Lemoria back at the command central here, we'll get back on course.
thank you, Lamar. I appreciate it.
Okay, Lemoria, tell us, we're good to go. Okay, back to you, Alexis. Everybody's got the document, so we're good to go.
All right, so we'll get to each of the amendments, but just please note that there are additional amendments from Senator Carrozza that aren't included in this chart. So the first part of the chart in the bill with the corresponding numbers sort of helps to frame where we are. So the state under the bill has a goal of 8,500 megawatts of offshore wind energy by 2031. And this bill is broken up to a few parts. It's broken up into a study of the transmission facilities, the requisite upgrades that will be needed in order to connect any type of spinning wind that is developed with our grid so that we can actually use it efficiently. And so the grid is as updated as possible. So there's an analysis piece that's required. There's also a procurement for proposals for transmission related projects for facilities and upgrades. We touched on this on Friday, but just sort of recapping. And then there is the procurement of the actual energy as those projects come through in order to get it, into our homes, into our businesses, et cetera. So beginning on this first part of the chart, one of the policy questions before the committee is who conducts the study. So across each of the amendments, that is kind of handled a little differently. I won't say across all of the amendments, but comparing the bill and the amendment. So originally under the bill, it's the PSC who consults with MEA, Maryland Energy Administration, and PJM in conducting this study. The goals are the same across Senator Hester's amendments and across Senator Augustine's amendments. However, under Senator Augustine's amendments, or Senator Hester's amendment, sorry, and this is on page H15, line 9. It's the PSC that requests the PJM to conduct the analysis for the study. So the build out goal is the same under each of those.
To the bill then?
We're referring kind of a little bit of both. So we're going back and forth between the bill and the study. So the actual bill, it may be helpful just to pull it up.
Handout?
So not quite. So that handout with H and A, those are the reprints. The bill, if you just wanted to reference that online, I think we're kind of a little easier to say paper. Right, the original bill isn't in front of us, but the amendments are, which relate to the bill. So if you're flipping through online.
Very nicely noted here that it's pages H15, line 9.
Mhm.
So as people are going through here, you can look at the document that's printed out, the reprint, because that's what the page numbers refer to.
And this.
So if we kind of go gradually, our central focus is going to be H, like those pages listed as H, right? Because a lot of the key concerns are embedded in our amendments. But if you just wanted to look at the bill, or if there was something that you wanted to reject, that can also be found when you pull it up as well. I think it's just easier to center our focus on one set of the amendments, and considering the other set of amendments are sort of minor in comparison, I think that makes the most sense. So under Senator Hester's amendments, H15, line 12, the Public Service Commission is required to work with PJM to ensure that the study mitigates risks of outages and costs. So there's another consultation piece that is required there. So another policy question that the amendments foresee is when the study is due. So under the original bill, the actual analysis is due by July 1st, 2024. Anyone scrolling, that's on page 12 of the bill. Under the amendments, there's an update that is due by July 1st, 2024, but not the final report. The amendments also require the Public Service Commission to consult with other states and PJM in this study. Then there's this question of, sure.
So to the on our chart here, it
Mhm.
says it requires PSC to consult with other states and PGM. So PGM is made up of 13 states, right?
That's right.
So are there any states outside of that 13 that they'll be consulting with, or is it all states that are in that PJM 13 state group?
So it essentially, PJM is intended to be the facilitator of those who already have these wind development projects. So the bill actually talks about those who have already kind of procured these resources. So it doesn't have to be limited to those states within the region, but if there are states within our 13 state jurisdiction that successfully have it. Those would be the primary ones, but it isn't limited just to those states. And there's a question on who takes the lead on the solicitations for transmission facilities, transmission upgrades, sort of modernizing transmission so that it can connect to the grid for distribution. So the bill just generally requires solicitation of proposals. It outlines the criteria for those proposals, evaluation proposals, what the proposals themselves as procured have to include. So under the bill, the PSC is required to take the lead in this solicitation for these transmission projects, including the solicitation, the modification, and the evaluation for these proposals. They're also authorized to work with PJM in issuing those solicitations. However, PSC retains the final authority to approve any of those projects. Under Senator Hester's amendments, either PSC or PJM can take the lead in issuing, evaluating, and modifying these solicitations. So even if PJM takes the lead on one of these three items, solicitation, selection, and modification, PSC still retains the authority to select that final project. So another question is whether a certificate of public convenience and necessity is required under the bill or under the amendment. So short answer is under the bill, a certificate for public convenience and necessity would be required, conditioned upon the approval of these proposals that are procured. This is essentially required before installation or construction of a facility. To receive a CPCN, there has to be a local public hearing process. There also has to be consideration of environmental factors, making sure that these installations are sited in a way that isn't too obtrusive. So under the original bill, that is a requirement to obtain the CPCN. This kind of gets at some of the testimony from the Public Service Commission that discussed potential impediments to getting this infrastructure in the ground, getting this infrastructure developed because of the sometimes delays that CPCNs require. Under the amendments, however, CPCNs are not required. They are exempt from these proposals. However, it's worth noting that in the solicitations, as we will see, the requirement has to consider the same type of environmental factors that a CPCN would. So the actual right of a certificate to begin the installation is not required. However, those considerations should be placed on the front end instead of the back end. The local process don't have to, have a hearing as typically established under a CPCN, but do have to place that in the procurement or in the proposals that will be procured.
About that?
Senator Washington.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to clarify. So are we saying that there would be no public hearing for when there's placing? I can't.
So they have,
if the amendments that are proposed, that you have as Hester amendments would not require the CPCN process.
So it's kind of, that makes me think of two things. So as these approvals are considered and whenever there is a debate about an order, PSC would be subject to their open meetings and they would have the hearings on those matters. The actual certificate, that's correct. Like you wouldn't need to get that actual certificate, but those requirements, you still have to prove and make the calls that everything that requires a CPCN is met in your proposal. Also has to be the consideration of the environmental factors and siting just generally. So the same process for notifying the locals isn't contemplated here, but that should be included in the proposal that they
I have a question.
send in.
Isn't there already an exemption process in the CPCN? I mean, isn't that already?
So there are
part of what can
exemptions
happen?
for certain facilities based off of the size of them. And so under this particular one, you would need to get the CPC in because of the size. And there may be, depending on what would be contemplated, right? So we're talking generator lines, we're talking about transmission lines. If there are any other pieces that require that CPCN at a local level, those would be exempted. However, you're right, there are general exemptions from the CPCN process based off of the size. But some technical expertise, I'm not sure what the scope and the megawatt hours of energy that 69,000 voltage.
Is there any
required.
notice at all required then? If there's not going to be a certificate of need, is there any way that a community would know or have an opportunity to contest the placement of a?
So at the local level, like it probably wouldn't be the counties or the municipalities doing it, but there is language that is unchanged by the amendments all throughout that requires this hearing on the proposals before they're selected. And they have to consider all of the evidence that, you know, the developers include. And again, that hearing is public, but it wouldn't be the localities or the counties doing that hearing, which is similar to how it would occur for a CPCN.
I mean, I recall the hearing, my colleague, so I recalled the hearing where it was asserted that communities essentially get in the way of our, and you know, of citing these for some, you know, possible logistical reasons. But, and if you could show me in the bill where there is an opportunity to fully, to evaluate the appropriate citing. I mean, if we're not going to do the CPCN process and therefore not take into accountability if a community is already disproportionately impacted by the citing of utilities, then where would that happen?
So under H19, line 16 through 20 requires the commission to select the proposal only after notice and after an evidentiary hearing. I'm trying to find the page on actual citing, but that's one part. Oh, okay. Okay, so if we look on H19L, right? So the actual citing requirements have to be met with the exception of that certificate of public convenience and necessity, right? So you don't have the formal CPCN process, but those other citing requirements have to be met. But the act, like notifying the locals, if that's what you're looking for, like particularly flagging insert county, other than the commission's process for doing that, there isn't a mandatory trigger for them to be directly notified.
Okay, go on, keep going.
I'm trying to remember where I left off. So I think we were on page 3 of the chart that talks about what has to be included in the proposals. So in general, proposals are required to focus on how multiple projects can connect and lead towards transmission. They have to identify how other storage facilities will be handled, and they also have to include community benefit agreements. So under the amendments, the proposals have to, as you know, as stated, incorporate those considerations that would have been required under a CPCN in addition to citing requirements and those procedures. Proprietary information, because this is a competitive solicitation process, also has to be removed under the amendments. In addition to those specific standards for what's included in the proposal, Senator Augustine's amendments require a cost benefit analysis and a cost allocation analysis, the form of which indicates how costs will be shared throughout the state and amongst ratepayers, and the other talks about potentially how costs will be allocated across states that may benefit from any transmission upgrades or features. In addition to adding everything else. I'll also say that the standard for the criteria under these proposals, before they even get to the vetting process, they do have to consider cost sharing. And the PSC can develop other criteria, but cost sharing is one. Senator Augustine's amendments also, in terms of just the projects, the transmission projects and the offshore projects generally, there's a requirement for them to be 10 miles away from the coast. Senator Carrozza's, not mentioned in or on the chart, requires that these projects be 27 miles away from the coast. So just keep that in mind as we go through. And any criteria that is established has to ensure that the transmission materials in the transmission infrastructure is not placed on land within the municipality of Ocean City. Mm-hmm.
So it was brought up in testimony at the hearing, some discussion or concerns about the actual height of the windmills. So is there anything delineated in either the amendments or the bill that has a number on that?
But there isn't a fixed number. That could be something that the PSC decides to add another component to. But in general, under the amendments, it requires a consideration of environmental factors, wildlife and habitat, but it doesn't necessarily say that there has to be a limit on how tall. But, I think in thinking about some additional projects, the height is more than likely compared to or directly related to the cost. And since this is a cost sharing piece, it may not be as high. But absent PSC developing that specific criteria, can't think of a specific height prohibition in the bill or the amendments.
Okay, so a question for Senator Carrozza, if you wouldn't mind, with the kind of along those same lines. If your amendment would have it like 27 miles, is that the kind of, is part of the reasoning for that because of how tall now these structures could be? So with your proposed amendment with the mileage out from shore, is part of your reasoning because of now that these windmills could be potentially a lot higher than they?
Thank you for the question. Yes, they went originally from like 300 feet. Now they're up over around 800. So it does impact the visibility as far as the mileage that we've been insisting upon from the beginning. The 27 miles also would be consistent with the state of Virginia, North Carolina, to be in line with those states as far as how far out their windmills are sited.
Just for reference, what we've heard talk about New Jersey. I wonder how far out are theirs? Does anybody know? I'm just curious for comparison.
I'm actually unsure, but I think it's around 20 miles out. I kind of have a better estimate of the ones that are currently under round 1 and round 2 in the state. But I think for New Jersey, we're looking at 20 miles away from the coast. And the ones in the state will be when, when operation begins around that also. At least from the order.
Okay, let's keep going through the chart and then we'll come back.
And I will note, as specific criteria come up, the PSC retains the right to place conditions on whichever proposals they procure or select. So similar to the rounds that we've had in the past, you know, the developers received the awards for these projects, and then there were certain conditions that were placed on them.
Senator Hester.
So I was just looking back to some of the research that we had done, and in New Jersey, Orsted's Ocean Wind One lease area is 15 miles from the coast.
To clarify that, within the footprint, the, one of them, within that footprint, you bring it, if they want to use the lease area in the future, they can be as close to 11.9 miles out. So while they might be beginning some of their siting further out within their footprint, they have the authority as they build these out, which is, they've indicated are their plans for those to be closer to shore.
Okay, just to clarify, Sarah Augustine, the 10-mile number is your part of your amendment, or? Okay. Okay, so Alexis, I thought you mentioned
Oh, okay, so
10 miles. Where did this 10-mile number come from?
so
Whose
that is
amendments?
within the projects generally. So that's within that first piece in the definition. So looking H2, so under the definition of qualified offshore wind project, it has to be more than 10 miles off of the coast of the state. More than, so H2 after line 18.
Okay, but that wasn't an amendment, that was part of
So this
that was the
actually,
amendment, okay. In the bill, okay.
right, so this was, yeah, this was an amendment to the bill. Right, yeah, this was amended text that came in from Senator Hester's amendment.
Hester's, okay.
So
And Senator Augustine's doesn't change that. Sorry, Senator Hester.
Sarah Hester.
yeah, so what it does that, because previously the 10-mile for Maryland, I was talking about New Jersey before. For Maryland, the 10-mile thing is it has to be between 10 and 30 miles. And by striking out the 30, we can actually go further out if we wanted to.
Okay, well, that's
Is
where
that
that
another-
10-mile number comes from. So right now it's limited to 10 to 30. Now you can actually, with this, you can actually go further. Okay, that's good. Back to you, Alexis.
So there's a question about when the actual solicitations for the proposals are due. And that date has changed. So under Senator Hester's amendments, there is additional time from December 1st, 2024 to July 1st, 2025. That's when the first election is able to be made. Again, maybe not again, I may not have mentioned this. If there is not a project that is found satisfactory, if there is not a project that meets the criteria that conforms to the additional criteria that PSC may adopt, that conforms to the criteria that is statutorily required, the PSC is not authorized to, or is not required rather, to select a proposal. Senator Augustine's permits the Public Service Commission to refuse to select the proposal if it is not cost beneficial. So specifically honing in on cost beneficialness is not necessarily a defined term within the bill. The state usually in the article has usually used cost benefit analysis, but cost beneficial, to look at that, to assess that, and if those requirements aren't met or if PSC does not find that satisfactory, that is a reason to refuse these requests. So the scopes of proposals are typically the same. You know, as mentioned, we're talking ways to interconnect multiple projects, looking at how the transmission grid needs to be updated so that the projects can distribute when onshore. And so the scope piece, what the proposals actually are for, are unchanged. So the proposals are to be selected. So this is distinct from when the proposals are actually due by the developers, when the proposals are actually selected, when the final selection is made. And I mentioned that this isn't a requirement, it isn't a mandate, but it is this authorizing, authority if the projects that they oversee do meet these requirements. So there's a distinction of about 8 or 9 months. So within the original bill, we're talking July 1st, 2026, of when the final selection for procurement of these proposals is due, and under the bill, December of 2027. Going back to the point I made about Senator Augustine's amendments, the standard for refusing or the standard for approving a project is a little higher because we've added cost beneficialness or effectively cost beneficial to the standards that must be met to approve a project. Under Senator Hester's and Senator Augustine's, there is a funding source that round 1 and round 2 developers were entitled to. There was a federal grant or a state incentive rather. The ratepayers, they were the ones that were entitled to it. And under these orders, it was required for the developers to pass 80% of any of that supplemental incentive funding onto ratepayers. That has been included within this bill for wind projects. However, certain money from the Inflation Reduction Act is exempted from that requirement to pass 80% on to ratepayers. There has to be certain criteria that is met, and there has to be an application to the Public Service Commission for the developers that have received funds to get this exemption from passing 80% of that money, basically, to ratepayers.
I would just like to point out that this is a bit of a big deal. And like, this is a change from sort of what was agreed to under the original contracts. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. The developers sort of agreed to accept the risk of future federal policy change. So this would be, yes, it's an application process. Yes, the PSC would have to allow it. But you were talking, about money that would have to be mostly credited back to ratepayers would then instead be retained by the companies. I don't have a dollar amount for you. The incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act are quite large and also pretty complicated. But we're putting out billions of dollars toward these projects over 20 years. So the dollar amounts are potentially substantial, subject to PSC approval. But I just wanted to highlight that that's a pretty big change right here in the middle of the bill.
So community benefit agreements make up a significant portion. So the proposals were required to be subject to community benefit agreements, and what those community benefit agreements have to include under the amendments are more heightened. So there has to be prohibitions against strikes, lockouts, and any sort of labor disruption under Senator Hester's amendments. That is also the case with Senator Augustine. So protecting the day-to-day work environment with these contractors and manufacturers. There has to be assurances that labor practices are in alignment with federal and state law and regulations, and that the work progress won't be erratically impeded. All right, so proposals for the actual facilities, the projects for the transmission. Then we get to DGS's role in procuring the actual energy that is facilitated through these transmission projects, through the wind turbines and the interconnection of such, so that energy actually is facilitated into homes and businesses, et cetera. So under the bill, DGS is the oversight entity for these power purchase agreements. So there's a goal of 1 million to 8 million megawatt hours that's anticipated to be procured under the bill. And that's decreased to 5 million megawatt hours under the amendments. The method under the amendments is a competitive seal procurement, which is a little broader than an invitation for a bid. So that gives a little bit of deference to the individual that is procuring within DGS, because an invitation for bids typically is limited to just the price. We'll see in the amendments that there are additional evaluation criteria for these procurement mechanisms that not only include price, but also include environmental factors and costs to habitats.
So for that, you started, this original bill had 1 million as a, I guess, a floor, then 8 and up to 8 million. With the amendment going up to 5, what's the reasoning? And we may have discussed a little bit last week, but just to bring it back up, why is there no floor on this with the amendment? Why is it just up to 5? I don't know if the Senator Hester, you as the sponsor of the amendment, have what's the reasoning on that? Why is there no floor?
Please.
Sure. So originally it had 1 million to 8 million megawatt hours. Under your amendments, there's no floor. It just says a goal of up to 5 million. So what's the reasoning for not having a floor or the lower number now?
So it allows for smaller procurement. DGS currently does do power purchase agreements, and they actually do some renewable energy power purchase agreements. We wanted to start off with a lower goal, so they could start with it and lock in at that rate and then go forward. It gives us more flexibility, like they can do it as much or as little as they want.
But as little could be, I mean, 0. I mean, there's no bottom number. How come? Why didn't you just drop the million to a specified number so you have a floor? Why is there really no floor in this now, right? That's what I'm trying to just figure that out.
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, like if they can't get a good price, there is an out there as well. But basically the 5 million megawatt hours, it fills out. That's how much we could get with the existing lease areas, the ones that are being built, that are going up now. So that's why that's where the 5 million came from.
I'd just like to add a little bit of context. So under the bill as introduced, the answer could still be 0. We could still just not procure anything. But as Senator Hester is mentioning here, like not every procurement needs to be 1 million megawatt hours. Like in fact, the first 2 offshore wind procurements the PSC did were for under that per year. And those are still pretty big procurements. So the state uses 1.5 million megawatt hours, the whole state, like government, in a year. So 1 million is 2/3 of that. So having 1 million as a base is that eats up most of what the state is already kind of purchasing. So it allows for flexibility. You could put in smaller projects, you could stack projects. I think that is why you don't necessarily need 1 million base. And the bill as introduced, didn't require purchasing 1 million. It was evaluate, and then if you do, then 1 million. So the answer could still be 0 under the bills introduced.
Hey, before we go any further, Evan, because I think last time we were voting, I thought you were helpful. And why don't you just come up here? Because I think you bring some knowledge about New Jersey and all, what's actually happening around the country that I think could be helpful. So just for questions, it's back up here.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And yeah, Evan, tell us your name again from last time.
Sure. I'm Evan Vaughn, Deputy Director of the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition. We're a group that represents the offshore wind developers.
Okay. Let's go back to you, Alexis. Let's keep going. And again, Evan's here for questions.
So the actual ultimate procurement window under the bill no longer exists under the amendments, right? So there was a year-long period, not quite a year, actually more like 6 months period through which these invitations for bidding from developers would be open, right? DGS will be able to accept these invitation for bids for 6 months. The timeline for the authorization for entering into a procurement contract is retained, but that 6-month window is not implicated in the bill anymore. However, the bidding developers still have 180 days to reply to any invitation for bid when it is released, if DGS so chooses to do so. Under the amended version of the bill, DGS, of course, is procuring this energy, but the Public Service Commission plays a role in consulting in those procurements as well. That does not exist in the original bill. Number 4 talks about the transition between an invitation for bids and a competitive seal procurement. I'm not sure if a representative from DGS is here, but essentially there's a little bit of additional breadth that is allowed for a competitive seal procurement that allows for the deferment to a procurement officer. And this is, maybe important. And I think this gets to intent because not only are we looking at price, but under the amendments, there has to be consideration of wildlife and environmental concerns as well to mitigate harms to pre-existing habitats. So the procurement for the energy also has to be subject to a community benefit agreement, and that's under the enhanced features in the amendments, not necessarily under the bill. Under the bill, it talked about collective bargaining, domestic preferences for material and manufacturing. But under the amendments, those community benefit agreements have to create assurances that there won't be labor disruptions or strikes or lockouts that would actually impede the labor. So how the individuals that are performing the labor, right, the contracting, are able to assemble, but also making sure that the work site is not disrupted. So the deadline for entering contracts under the amendment is changed to September 1st, 2025, instead of April 30th, 2025. That is optional. It's authorizing. That date of September 1st, 2025 can be modified if there is an unforeseen circumstance. In addition to community benefit agreements, there has to be an attestation that's included in these procurement energy contracts to show, and actually at the time, but within 90 days of entering into the contracts, there has to be an attestation of a labor peace agreement. So going back to ensuring against any type of labor disruptions. So there's a question about the excess energy and what happens to that. Under the bill, the excess energy is sold on the wholesale market by DGS. Now the state does purchase and procure renewable energy credits. Purchasing and procuring ORECs in general is sort of an unforeseen circumstance, but the state would take the role of actually buying energy on a wholesale market, which is a little different from the method that we have and have had. And because the state does have to meet renewable portfolio standards, we would be exempt if the state procures enough of this type of energy to meet the portfolio standard, 100%. There's also a report that's listed on page 9 that requires the individuals who are competing for these transmission projects to create efforts for small minority women-owned and veteran-owned businesses. And we discussed this additional component last week. There are 4 positions that are created in the Public Service Commission to cover the study. And there's an authorizing $3.5 million annual appropriation that will cover consultant fees to do the study and the analysis through PSC's purview. And again, Senator Carrozza's touch narrowly on the distance between the shore and these transmission projects. So instead of 10 miles away from the coast, it would be 27 miles away from the coast, but everything else is our understanding, and please correct if wrong, Senator Carrozza. Everything else would be retained. I'm talking, yep, right.
Landfall issue. because I do want to talk about the land.
That's right.
issue.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, just before we talk about the amendments from Senator Carozza, the only thing I picked up on, and maybe I in terms of the Augustine amendments versus the Hester amendments, is this the issue of a cost benefit analysis language, that, and then, you know, then therefore, as a result, the PSC PSC can refuse to select any proposal for procurement after taking into account that cost benefit. So that's the only difference between, for, you know, all this. And then as far as the Carozza amendments, I've got the 27-mile issue, and then this language about ensuring the transmission infrastructure will not locate or interconnect in the municipality of Ocean City. Are there other amendments other than those two?
When I did the 3 amendments, I came back and just changed the language a little bit. And I think that's what you
That's what it was
provided us,
replacing, right.
but didn't include the
Mhm.
other.
Two, right? So the other two would be that 27-mile piece, the language, making sure that none of the transmission infrastructure lie within Ocean City. And then ensuring that all of the projects generally are 27 miles away from.
Okay, but those are the only two issues that we would characterize as Carozza amendments. I guess that's
Sure,
just, we're
that's
clear.
right.
Correct.
And then we have this, basically this one issue of cost benefit analysis, and the PSC can refuse on that. That's the difference here. Okay, so the issues are relatively narrow. So open up for discussions on any aspect. You know, at the end of the day, it's about the transmission study. It's about the procurement. It's a lot here, but fundamentally those are, you know, kind of the main issues, and either, you know, and then the economic issues. We didn't really get into economic development topics, some of those potentials, and climate and environment. Senator Watson and Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question, that very last page talks about, you know, efforts to promote opportunities, small minority business, veteran owned. Is this best effort, percentage based, stretch goal? I mean, how are we characterizing that?
Let's go to the language there. So it doesn't quantify what best efforts is, but you do have to give like the total numbers of those individuals that fall within that category. But there isn't a metric for how you will go about best effort. So that part is pretty broad, but there is the requirement for the number of those individuals and the percentage of those individuals, women, minority, women-owned and veteran-owned businesses.
Where is that at?
That's 8, well, should be H25 as well, but let's make sure.
Efforts to promote participation.
That's right. So it's on H25. And that's those are the items that should be included in the report.
So this is what they're going to report, but there's no minimum standard or anything. And the reason I bring that up is I remember, you know, how wild it was when we started trying to get MGM in Prince George's County, and they were going to make best efforts. And it turned out to be very little effort at all when it came to minority contracts and those types of things. You know, if the body thinks this is fine in its form, then I'm fine. But it just seems like we need to have some teeth in here to force that minority component. I mean, these are going to be huge number of jobs and huge benefits for a lot of people. I mean, it doesn't state that these businesses have to be Maryland based. Maybe you make the argument that Maryland doesn't have this expertise and it has to come from out of state. But I think it's loose. And I don't think that it forces them to meet any kind of goal. It just says report on what you can do.
So a couple of things come up. Under the bill, or under the first and second round of development, that issue had to be addressed, but it was still that same level of breadth, right? Provide opportunities or create best efforts for these particular types of businesses. And what I've seen happen throughout the code is if there is any sort of percentage metric that requires, that may trigger the OAG to require a disparity study to justify it. So it's similar to what we did with the Empower bill that we passed a couple weeks ago. So if we were to do that, I would caution against the potential need for a disparity study to justify any particular metrics or any particular percentages.
Yeah, that was the Senator Ellis, back and forth we had on the floor. I would just say, just this language, has to go over to the House. Chair Wilson, if you guys want to talk about tightening these up, I'm sure he'd be interested in working on something, but we have to be mindful of the constitutional issue. If we don't have backup of disparity, that's as Alexis mentioned. And so, okay, that's it. Okay, so back to the so before we talk about the Carrozza 2 issues, can we just, Senator Augustine, just give me some, let's just discuss that one difference of cost benefit analysis, and maybe we resolve that, and then we can take up the Carrozza amendments as well. But let's maybe resolve that topic right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so very much. I mean, it really is as straightforward as was mentioned. I just felt like it was important for us to have a bit of a cost benefit guardrail on it at that point in the process. And so that's really, what that is. This is important. This is significant investment that we're going to make, and one that we really should make. But I just think that when we do it, we should also just be aware, making sure that's something that we look at. I just think that's the right thing to do, to look at the cost benefit. And that was the rationale for me putting it in there, because I didn't necessarily see it. It's in a couple of different places, as was mentioned, but yeah. Yeah, basically the real one you see is on page 3, where it adds on to the proposals, but must also require a cost benefit and cost allocation analysis. You can see that in the amendment.
6 on page 4 or 5.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Then it follows as well onto the page 4 under 6, when the proposals being selected again, just making sure that the cost benefits are there. And with that, I would actually move that amendment.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, we have motion second on that one topic, which seems reasonable to me. I don't know. Let's discuss that. Anybody have a different view? Senator Brooks, did you have some comment? Yeah, okay, we have a motion and we have a second on what we'll call the Augustine Amendment, but essentially this one topic area of cost benefit analysis. Senator Hester, any comment before we take a vote?
Thank the senator for working with me over the weekend on this, and
Okay, excellent. Okay, anyway, well, all in favor of that particular cost benefit analysis amendment, raise your hand. All opposed, that carries. And that is really the main difference. So that really leaves us, Senator Carrozza, with your 2 issues, one on the 27 miles, and the other ensuring that infrastructure will not locate or interconnect in the municipality of Ocean City. So those are 2 separate issues. Let's discuss each one separately. So we'll turn it over to you, Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did break the issues up to, first of all, would be the landfall transmission on the island of Ocean City itself. Many of you all have spent a lot of time there. The 10-mile island is habited, completely the 10 miles down the beach. Also, I think there's, as we look at this, the most cost-effective interconnection for the offshore wind farms should leverage existing land-based transmission and distribution systems. And many of you may or may not know, but the existing electric infrastructure in and around Ocean City consists of small size electric distribution lines that are already at maximum capacity. They're simply too small to handle 8,500 megawatts of offshore wind electricity. And common sense just would dictate that you would go to areas that don't have these challenges, both population wise and also with the capacity issues that Ocean City has. So therefore, my amendment, which would be on, well, this was to the original bill, but it would basically make clear that any of the qualified, that basically we would exclude any landfalls, additional transmission or distribution infrastructure, or any related above ground equipment within the corporate limits of Ocean City. And so I would, for both economic, safety, socioeconomic reasons, would move the amendment to exclude corporate Ocean City for the transmission coming on, the landfall coming on corporate Ocean City.
Okay, any discussion of that particular amendment? Yes, Senator Watson and Senator Hester.
Thank you. So when I look at a map of current mid-Atlantic offshore wind lease areas, I'm going to assume that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And the reason what we have existing is where it is in terms of leased space is because it is perpendicular to where it needs to tap into. Is that a fair statement? From somebody.
Sure, Senator, I'm happy to answer the question. So maybe a two-part answer, if you'll permit me.
Yeah.
So the lease areas are where they are because that's what the federal government determined after a almost a decade-long process of public feedback, studying of the environmental lay of the land under the ocean, the benthic environment and the subsea soils, as well as ship traffic, fishing and other considerations. And so that is why those lease areas are where they are. The shortest, to the second part of the answer, as far as, why would the cables go in any particular place?
Yeah.
Under sort of status quo, those cables are going to go to the place that is the least expensive for, minimizing the amount of upgrades that are needed to get that one project hooked into the grid. Under this proposal, the total scope of Maryland's goal would be looked at. And so that there may be a difference. In fact, I'm almost certain there will be a difference between what's best for a single project versus what's best for every project, because the first project that comes along is going to go to the cheapest place. And then the second and third project will be out of luck, essentially. So it may make sense to preemptively upgrade a single location to accommodate all three of those projects instead of letting the first one get a discount, essentially, and then having the next two have to do something that's maybe more disruptive or more expensive. So it could be a straight line, but it really depends on where the substations are that have open space.
Well, to the senator's point, it seems like she's more receptive to not upgrading what is existing if it's in corporate Ocean City, but if you change that trajectory of where that transmission has to go, of course, a longer run could become very cost prohibitive, right? I mean, we want to do this thing as efficiently as possible. The goal is to do it minimum cost, get maximum bang for the buck, and hopefully bring some partners in. And so when we're going from what it looks like 10, 12 miles out to 27, and then not being able to tap into corporate Ocean City, but somewhere else, that just seems like an exorbitant amount of cost, that we would have to eat.
I think that's a good point. And I would just add that, the concerns that Senator Cardoza raised, which that's part of the study. So the study will show that Ocean City doesn't have the right infrastructure, that it would be more expensive to upgrade Ocean City than another location, if that is in fact true. So that's the reason why the bill contemplates a study, essentially. And it could be very expensive to kind of go against what the grid experts who know what the system vulnerabilities and strengths are.
Okay, wait. Look here, let's go around the horn. Senator Hester wanted to weigh in, and then we're going to go to Senator Carozza after that. Senator Hester.
Thank you. I mean, I really appreciated the exchange that we just had between Senator Watson and Mr. Evan. I think that it's really important that we do the study. New Jersey saved $900 million by doing the transmission and distribution as effectively as they could. And what we want to avoid is having 6 lines running out from the lease areas and just have one. And so the study should look at, where the safest place is, where the most cost-effective place is, how we're going to share this with other states who want to buy in. I mean, my goal is that we're producing so much, wind energy that we're exporting it and we become, carbon negative as a state. Wouldn't that be great?
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Carozza.
Just a comment, when they started talking about some of this transmission, they were already talking about looking at Delaware where there's sections of Delaware where it's not built at all. And there's already been contemplation for that. I mean, the bottom line is why, you look at Ocean City right now. You look how it's built up, and you have the facts that it simply cannot handle. It doesn't have the capacity to handle it. All we're saying is just let's take it out of the mix right now, based on safety and kept capacity and socioeconomic reasons.
Okay, so again, I think there's 2 issues. This Ocean City issue is, and essentially we have an amendment of sorts. So are you moving this amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Meant to the First Amendment that would exclude any landfalls, additional transmission or distribution of infrastructure within the corporate limits of Ocean City.
Okay, is there a second on that amendment? Okay, Simon Ayres second. So we will, discussion, and then we'll do a roll call.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I just would say that, as has been said, we have a study in place that will look at this, and for us to foreclose on any of it right now, I think would be a little bit short-sighted. And we want to make sure that we have a very comprehensive process and that we are taking into everything into consideration, including all the issues along the whole shoreline. And so I'm going to be voting no on the amendment.
Vice Chair Kagan? Your light's on? No? Okay. Okay, so we have this amendment. Oh, yes, Senator Gallion.
So
yes,
if it just to be cleared up for me. So I'm agreeing with the study. With the study, we're going to find these different things out. Do we, as this legislative body, really have another sincere bite at the apple between the study and when these proposals start moving forward? That's my question, because if we don't, I think we do definitely need to address these things up front now. So do we have another real bite at the apple on this right after this study is completed?
well, I'm just looking at the timelines here of the studies. I mean, we're going to be in a couple of sessions, to be honest with you, if you really want to get down to it before this. What are we talking about? 2020, whatever, but
I start really 10 years ago with the talk of this. I mean, so aren't we kind of already 10 years in a way to when all this first was started and talked about? I just want to make sure we get this right, and that, you know, we're having a study. Are we going to be able to really take a good look at this after we get the results from the study?
okay, well, Alexis, why don't you take a crack? And I'm just looking at the bill and the timelines here, but go on if you have a response.
So I'll say yes, and I'm thinking about when the actual like BOEM lease process ends, and I'm not too certain, but I'll also say that any approval or any project proposal that is selected, the commission can modify that. So throughout the length of the proposals, those things can be modified.
We're saying that can modify things, right?
Mhm.
I want to make sure that us as this committee and this legislature, if needed, can look at this stuff before PSC gets the final say, so to speak. So is that really addressed? That's really the crux of my question.
So the actual update on the study is due July 1, 2024. So that would give some time to reconvene and to reconsider based off of that study for next session. There can be a status update before sine die next year. The actual report wouldn't necessarily be due, but they will be considering parts of the study in the interim.
Further questions for on this particular amendment number 1 from Senator Carozza before we do a roll call? Okay, we're going to take the roll.
Senator, ready?
Yes, Senator.
Senator Kagan,
No.
Senator Augustine, Senator Gallion,
Yes.
Senator Watson. Senator Lewis Young. Senator Brooks. Senator Carozza.
Yes.
Senator Hester. Senator Washington.
No.
Senator Simon and Senator Feldman.
No. Okay, then the other issue is the 27-mile number. Senator Carozza, you want to speak to the 27-mile amendment?
I do want to speak to the 27 miles, and this is coming from my hometown mayor, Rick Meehan, and many of you have met him, and he has been consistent from the first time that Mayor Meehan and I were at the same public hearing when it was unveiled that you could actually, you had visibility with these offshore wind towers. So from the very beginning, Mayor Meehan has been consistent to say, this is something we can support, but move them offshore. I mean, he's been saying this going back to 2017. So again, he brings up the issue. He said, could please share with your colleagues that the state receives all of the same benefits, whether they are 11.9 miles out, which is how close they will be under the US wind proposal, or if they're 27 miles out from the shore. The wind farm will still provide the same amount of energy, create the same number of jobs, provide the same economic impact. And we look at what other states have done. Virginia and North Carolina have moved these, they are 27 miles out. And as I already mentioned here, the tourism angle of this is, you better bet that other states use that. Come to Virginia Beach for our pristine beaches and views. And then you can see, what the contrast will be with the windmill towers. And I just want to clarify something because I keep hearing 15 or 17 miles out is the real, the distance. But just so everyone's clear that when US Wind filed with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, it is the 11.9. So within their footprint, they can come that close. They may not be starting there now, but they have the option of coming that close. So we have been consistent on this. We're looking at it from the standpoint, we always say, well, if other states can do it, why can't Maryland? So this is a reasonable request. So this amendment would basically say that these qualified offshore projects are located a minimum of 27 miles from the Maryland coastline. And so I move the amendment.
Okay, Senator Hester.
So I do appreciate the senator's thoughts here. I've looked at this as, there's a balance here between what Maryland's doing and what the federal government is doing. And these maps for the lease areas for the new ones are currently in draft, and they're anywhere from 17 to 80 miles out. The ones that we're talking about that are closer have already been leased. So they're not part of the equation anymore. But these future leasing sites, either Maryland can buy the wind that comes off of them, or somebody else can buy the wind that comes off of them. We are not in control of these federal lease sites. And so, I think by proceeding with the bill in this manner, it gives Maryland and Ocean City, a seat at the table when it comes to the citing and the evidentiary study and all of it. It's just, but we can't control what other folks do on these lease sites. And I can't say that strongly enough.
Okay, is there a second on the Carosa amendment on the 27 miles? Okay, Simon Air, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing them, we're going to do a roll call vote, starting with the vice chair.
Okay, Senator Kagan,
No.
Senator Augustine. Senator Gallion.
Yes.
Senator Watson. Senator Lewis Young. Senator Brooks. Senator Carosa.
Yes.
Senator Hester. Senator Washington.
No.
Senator Simon Air. And Senator Feldman.
No. Okay, any other amendments anybody wants to put on the table? Okay, seeing none, what we have on the table, we have the okay. So we had the Augustine amendments, then would you
I
like to
move the
move?
Hester amendment.
Okay, second, Senator Hester. So take that up. All in favor of the Hester amendments, raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, we've got 2 dissenters. So those amendments carry. So now we have the
Move the
Hester.
bill as amended.
Yes, we have a question, Senator Kagan.
I just have a question. Like Senator Watson, I was looking at the back page, page 9 of the chart. It would authorize a $3.5 million appropriation for consulting fees. So is that the assumption then that PJM, which is doing the consulting, is that a no bid contract? Do they get the whole $3.5 million? Is that clear? Does that go into a fund and then it's allocated? Could we just understand that? Because that's real money.
Okay, who's got the answer for that one?
I can at least talk to where the 3.5 million came from. That came from the original
Steve,
fiscal
could
note.
you, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Mr. Ross. Could
Yes,
Yeah.
It
thank
came from the original fiscal note, which Bryce was broken up into 2 parts. There's originally PSC had to do this, the first study is $500,000 was their estimate. And then to go forward with the state agreement approach, what the New Jersey approach, they wanted $3 million more for consultant costs. So if the 500,000 plus 3 million, that's where you get the 3.5. The bill as amended has PJM doing that first study, and then, or being requested to do the study. And then the rest of it seems to line up closer with like the state agreement approach. I don't know how much PSC needs to do that. They're still going to need money to evaluate these proposals. But I don't have an updated dollar amount for you as amended for what PSC needs, but that's where the 3.5 came from.
So thank you, Mr. Ross. I wouldn't mind a $3 million consulting fee either, but that's not an option. I just wonder whether it says we're authorized. Is that, again, sort of, is that a floor? Is that a ceiling? Is that just the amount that we're setting aside? Is that?
So looking at that language
And
in
is
the
that bid or no?
at the end, I would say, if I was evaluating that for purposes of a fiscal note, is that that's not an effective mandate. It's sort of intent. Yeah, it's intent language, and then it
Okay.
doesn't say shall include. So both of those things mean it would just sort of be directing, intent to try to get it funded, but it wouldn't be a mandate for purposes of a fiscal and policy note.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, with that.
Yes, or the budget.
With that, Senator Augustine, you look like you were in the process of moving
Yes.
the bill as amended. Okay, I thought it was mid-sentence, Senator Kagan. Okay, Senator Washington is the second. Let's do a roll call on this, starting with the vice chair.
I think I'll just.
Okay, Senator Kagan.
Aye. Senator
Kagan, yes. Senator Augustine.
Yes.
Senator Augustine, yes. Senator Gallion.
My vote.
Absolutely.
I just looking at this kind of from a 30,000 view, I have some concerns about the reliability of wind as you compare it to things like nuclear as it starts. But in our discussion, they came out, this is a lot of the PSC has a lot of power and sway on this. I'd be a lot more comfortable if I knew after the study that we were going to have stuff that we could really review here. I'm not sold on that either. And ultimately, the biggest thing I have with that going, the process we're heading towards, I'm worried about our ratepayers, and I'm not sold that this isn't going to increase prices. If if you're looking at stuff through PJM and through the 13 states is one thing, but if you're just looking where PSC is going to be really in the lead, that's Maryland. And this got, I just have concerns about increases on our ratepayers. So with that, I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Gallion, no. Senator Watson?
Yes.
Senator Watson, yes. Senator Lewis Young?
Yes.
Senator Lewis Young, yes. Senator Brooks?
Yes.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Carozza?
In my vote, in addition to the issues that I've raised on behalf of Ocean City, I also wanted to share additional concerns that I've been on the record for years on. That has to do with the impact of offshore wind turbines on our commercial fishing industry. When I go back home and meet with my watermen, and given some of the encounters they've already had with just the survey boats with the offshore wind developers, there's already been issues. I've been on record, it's not just today, on my concerns with the impact on the commercial fishing industry, on sea and mammal life in general, on the impact to ratepayers and the impact on taxpayers. So for all of those reasons, I'm voting no on this legislation.
Senator Watts, I'm sorry, Senator Carozza, no. Senator Hester? Senator Hester, yes. Senator Washington?
Yes.
Senator Washington, yes. Senator Simonair?
No.
Senator Simonair, no. And Senator Feldman?
Yes.
Senator Feldman, yes.
With that, Senate Bill 781 as amended passes, and that concludes our hearings and voting for today.